Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. And today we are going to continue our journey through genealogical standards. And we will begin the section that is reasoning from evidence. The Genealogical Proof Standard requires genealogists to base conclusions on reliable evidence from independent information items. A conclusion's soundness tests on A, assessments of each relevant source and information item, and B, genealogists' abilities to reason from the evidence that those sources and information items provide. 14 standards address reasoning from evidence. And today we're going to discuss 3 of them. They are standard number 37, sources, information, and evidence, standard number 38, source preference, and standard number 39, information preference. So standard number 37, as soon as I give you the caveat that I do not represent the Board for the Certification of Genealogists, I am just an associate who just submitted his renewal last month, or the month before last, or I can't wait for it to show up so I can know whether I can continue to be a certified genealogist. It's actually one of my favorite things in the world to be. Anyway, that said, standard number 37, sources, information, and evidence. Genealogists view sources as containers of information items potentially relevant to research questions. They use the information items as evidence of answers to those research questions. See glossary for definitions of evidence, information, research questions, and source. Let's not forget to go back to that glossary every once in a while to remind ourselves what things mean among genealogy standards. This one is actually fairly clear. A piece of paper is an example of a container. It contains information. Actually, it contains data. And what you do with that data becomes information. And recognize that things may be potentially relevant to research questions. One of the problems that you're going to encounter over the journey that you're taking is that some things initially may not appear to be relevant, but down the line, they actually turn out to be very relevant. An example that comes to mind for me is, why was John McNeely always a witness to the deeds of this one guy? It turned out that that one guy was the father of his wife. Didn't know the woman's maiden name in the beginning, learned it later, then was able to determine that that was her father. And there was a relationship between them, witnessing a lot of deeds. Standard number 37 for me is pretty straightforward. Just recognize that what may be not relevant today may be relevant tomorrow, and recognize that that piece of paper contains a lot more than just the words that are on it. When we're looking at sources, information, and evidence, we should be knowing what created the document, why was the document created, who is the speaker, and what comes after that document. Those are all pieces that all work together, and they all should come together when it's all said and done. Standard 38 is source preference. Whenever possible, genealogists prefer to reason from original records that reliable scribes carefully created soon after the reported events. They also prefer original records that competent authorities checked or vetted, and that institutions maintain with protections from alteration, damage, and tampering. At the same time, genealogists understand that some preferred sources could be proved inaccurate, less desirable sources might be proved accurate, or less desirable sources may be the only extant relevant sources. See glossary for definitions of accurate, original record, record noun, and source. Always search for the original record. If you've got a derivative, or you've got a copy, or you've got whatever you want to call it, that's not the original record, always search for the original. Does that mean that the information to be found, the data to be found on that original record, on that piece of paper, is accurate? No. Does it mean that it's the, quote, truth? No. Always recognize that records cannot exist in isolation. You have to find other records. And I don't mean derivatives of that original. I mean other records that you can correlate with this record. No record can stand by itself. If nothing else, you should be finding the record that created that record or the record that was the successor to that record, and keep moving down the line. Basically, I don't know how you're going to be able to determine whether institutions maintain with protections from alteration, damage, and tampering, because you weren't there. But recognize that courthouses tend to operate like that. Court records tend to be like that. I can remember somebody being found to alter a record in the National Archives and got caught. And they put a note on the record to say this record had been altered, kind of thing. I think that's what I heard. I haven't looked for that record. It was a Lincoln court-martial date, something to do with a court-martial, pardoned from a court-martial on the day of the assassination, when in fact it was the year before. So you have to watch out for these kind of things. Remember, no record exists in isolation. And then standard 39, information preference. Whenever possible, genealogists prefer to reason from information provided by consistently reliable participants, eyewitnesses, and reporters with no bias, potential for gain, or other motivation to distort, invent, omit, or otherwise report incorrect information. At the same time, genealogists understand that some preferred information items could be proved inaccurate, less desirable items might prove to be accurate, or they may be the only extant relevant information items. See glossary definitions of accurate and information. So basically, we're dealing with the same issue as we were with the previous standard, except now we want to know who the person is or who the people are, because we want to know what their participation was, what their role was, what their agenda was. You can look at two pensions, one from the soldier, a survivor pension, and one from the widow, and the soldier says one thing and the widow says another, and you have to reconcile them, and you realize it's because the widow's trying to get something that she doesn't think she's entitled to. Even if she is entitled to it, sometimes it looks like she's behaving like she's not entitled to it. Those kind of things. So always know who the speaker is. Now, this is very definitely difficult when it comes to a census record, because we never know who the informant is. And sometimes when we look at a death record, there's an informant, but we don't have a clue who that informant is. So we have to research them and figure out who they are. And the same thing goes for witnesses on deeds, witnesses on claims, witnesses on receipts, those kind of things. You always want to know who the witnesses are, because they're part of the process. So don't just think from the perspective of consistently reliable participants. Recognize there's an S on the end of that word. So this has been Craig. We've covered 3 more today, those being 37, 38, and 39. And I look forward to talking to you again.